Hello everyone, in this video let us start using test management for Jira for lightweight and ad hoc testing. So far we have learned how test management for Jira works. In the first video we spent some time talking about how to quickly start using test management for Jira, where we installed it and we started using it almost immediately. In the second video, we learned how to enable test management for Jira only for a specific project and some specific issue types. Now we have to make the most out of test management for Jira, and there are different ways of using it. And when you talk about different ways of using it, we have the concept of test cases, we have the concept of test cycle, test plan, and we'll be taking a look at all those aspects as well in future videos. But I want to spend some time talking about how can we use test management for Jira for doing simple testing without worrying too much about creating test cycles, test plans. And for this particular example, I will be using a very simple Agile based project. So we have one project here where we are trying to use Jira software and we are trying to follow Scrum. And in this particular project, I just want to spend some time first briefly talking about what we are trying to do so that you can also relate, and we'll create some test cases that we will link to our stories. Now, in my project, I'm trying to develop, let us say, a mobile app. And in case you're trying to develop a mobile app for iOS or maybe Android, you can do native development. But in this case, I'm using a framework. Let us say I'm using some framework to write my code, write just one piece of code, but I have the option to generate a build for maybe Android and iOS using the same code base. So you have different frameworks that can let you do that. But the thing that I'm really concerned about is testing. I just want to make sure that whatever feature I'm developing, it works really well on Android and iOS. Now, if you look at my project, I have some epics. So there are different ways of organizing your project, and in this particular case, I am using very high-level features like login functionality, integrations, online payments, location-based services, and so on. So you have the option to use either epics, or you can also use components to have further breakup. So for this particular example, I'll be using epics, and I have a simple backlog with maybe few sprints that are running. Now, I have two stories here that I have intention to develop. I want to basically take care of those stories in my sample sprint 2. Let us rename this sprint to something like December 1st sprint. And let us say every month we have two sprints. So I want to make sure that I have these two stories, and of course few other stories that I want to make sure they are released. And of course, before releasing, we have to make sure we test it properly. So I have two stories. One is develop the login functionality, and where we will make sure that the login functionality works, and we have some test cases that we want to do, that we have some tests that we want to perform for this login functionality to work perfectly. We have to make sure that those tests pass. And the other story is login with Facebook. So when you have, let us say, login functionality in your application, you may want to have this login with third parties like Facebook or maybe Twitter. And these two stories will have their own test cases. Now, there are different ways of linking these stories to a test case. Let us take a look at both ways. The first thing that I will do, I will probably open one of my story called develop the login functionality, and I will probably open this in a separate window. You can also do that using this traceability section that appears on the project, on the issue detail, not project detail, issue detail view on the right hand side. So you have the option to either create a test case or you can also link it to an existing test case, which we already have. So before I start the linking, I just want to show you in a different tab. I'll open this test tab, this section where we can take a look at all the test cases in a separate window. And I just want to spend some time talking about how I've already defined some test cases, and these test cases are already part of some folders. So if you look at my test cases under my project X. Project X is the name of my project, and we have some folders on the left hand side. You can create a folder if you want. Let us say you want to create a new folder for let us say something like go live tests. So you can have these folders. You can then organize your test cases that you want to have under those folders, which is always good because you will be able to manage them properly. And you can also have some kind of hierarchy, so you can have a subfolder. So we'll probably not worry about subfolders. We'll just focus on these three tests that we have. Now we also have the option on top to create maybe a plan or a cycle. We'll not do that. We'll simply create test and we'll link it to the stories and we'll perform the testing. So let me show you very briefly one of my test case called login form validations for blank data. Let us say if I want to make sure that if the user is entering the blank username or blank password, there should be some error thrown. So when you look at the test case, we have the name of the test case, the objective, we have the option to use preconditions and some details. So under the details, you have the option to use or basically add this test case to a specific folder. You can have status, priority, component. So this is the component that comes directly from the project. So we have some components like UI, integration, and API. So since I'm trying to do testing for my validations on the UI on my login page, I want to just make sure that it is under my UI component. So it is always good to have these fields filled up because it will help me in reporting later on. And I also want to have some estimated time that I think should take in performing this test. So this is really simple. You can just enter maybe 1 hour or maybe 30 minutes. It is up to you. Now, the important thing here is the test script. So every test case will have a test script, and test script can have either a step-by-step details of what you want to do with what you want tester to do, like enter username, enter password, click on this button and that button. So this is like a detailed instruction, or you can have like simple plain text, which is also fine. But you can also have like the BDD based testing, which we'll not worry about in this video. In this video, let's just focus on the simple step-by-step instructions that I want to give to my tester. Now I have the steps mentioned here, like step number 1, step number 2, and for this particular test to pass, we have to make sure that all these steps they result in pass, not failure. So what I can do here, I can then save this, or I can simply do few things. Like, for example, if you want to take a look at the executions, which will come up here, the moment you start running the test cases, the moment you start performing the test, the execution tab will show you the details. The traceability will show you the linked issues. There is no link right now, which we'll be doing right now. We also have the option to attach files, add comment, and have different versions. For example, for the same test, for the same test case where we are trying to do login form validations, you can have different versions. So for this particular video, we just want to keep things very simple, and even if you're doing things simple, it doesn't mean that we are not testing it properly. It is really based on what level of testing you want to do, how many tests you want to perform, how big is your project, how big is your team size, and if you want to do maybe simple testing along with every release, along with every sprint release that you're doing, you can do simple lightweight testing by attaching your test cases to your stories. So if you go back to the project, and if I, let us say, click on my login functionality story, where I just want to take a look at my story, of course, but I also want to link it to my test case, which is already there in my test library or my test repository. So to link it to a specific test, so right now it says develop the login functionality, which is great. I can see the details, but I want to link it to maybe an existing test case. So I can click on this link, and when you click on this link, you will be basically presented with this huge pop-up where you have your test repository or test library where you have the option to take a look at the folders. Now, the test case that I want to check is basically the first one, or maybe the third one as well, where I am trying to test the password validations on sign up. So basically, you want to make sure that whenever your user is trying to enter the password on a sign up page, you want to perform some checks whether the password should have these many characters or these many numbers and so on. So let us have these two test cases added to the login functionality. So this is all good. Now you can see here that right now we have a test case which is linked to your story, and you can see here the approved status of the test case. So this is something that you can do if you want to, let us say, build your test library, but you just want to have them in a different state. You just want to make sure that these test cases are not ready for actual testing. You can have a different status. So if you go back to your test case, you have the option to use something like a draft. It is totally up to you. And there are a few more things that we can do here. For example, right now we are using a simple test case using the fields that we have. But if you go to the configuration section, like if you click on these three dots, you have the option to basically have different custom fields. For example, if you click on a custom fields here, and if you go to test case, you can have something like, a field that you can create. Let us say you want to create some field like customer, maybe. So let us say you're developing this for a specific customer, and you just want to have this in a test case as well, along with your stories. So let us say you have a customer with a select list kind of a field. So you can have select list single choice. It is something similar to your Jira custom field, and you can have your customer names like Microsoft. I have really big customers, Google, maybe NASA. So these are my three customers, and if you want to make sure that this is a required field, you can do that. Will not really worry about the required field. And if you click on the add button, you have a new custom field added. Now, if I go back to my test case, if I click on, let us say, one of my test case, which is login form validations, I have the option to use this field called customer, and this will let you select maybe Microsoft or Google or NASA. It is really up to you, and it is visible under the more information. So you have the option to add some more information, and I'm sure you can relate it, because sometimes you are not satisfied with the fields that come with the features of test management for Jira for test case, but we have the option to add a new field, which is always great. Now let us go back to the story, and right now I am ready to perform the testing. And what I can do, I can simply just worry about simply assigning it to the tester or maybe the developer, and the person who is probably doing the development can be the same person who is doing a testing. If you think it as a simple validation, you're just doing some checks, but you have the option to also assign a test case to a specific tester, or you can also do one thing, which is something that you can do for having a better organization. For every story, you can have a subtask called test this particular story, and you can probably do the same thing, like link your test cases to your subtask, which is dedicated for testing. So let us go back to the original backlog view. So I'll enter this the summary here, login with Facebook, and I want to link it to a specific test case that we already have, and I may want to add a subtask. For example, if you want to have a dedicated subtask for testing, so that you can assign it to a specific tester in case you want to manage it along with your Jira issues in the same sprint. Test login with Facebook, and I will create my subtask. And you have different ways of organizing your test cases. this is just one way. And if I probably click on the issue in a I want to open it in a separate window so I can show you properly how to attach it to a specific test case, which we did earlier, but I want to maybe do it for a subtask. So if I have a subtask here, I'll click on the subtask test login with Facebook, and right now we don't really see the traceability tab here. So what I will probably do, I'll go to the project settings and I will also enable my traceability, my test management for Jira functionality for a subtask as well, because I think while I'm working on linking these test cases, I think it will be a good idea to have my test cases also linked to the subtask so I can track them properly. So I'll just wait for it to appear. So in the previous video, we saw how to enable test management for Jira for a specific issue type. We'll do the same thing again. If I go to the test management for Jira, I just want to show how much flexibility you have when you're working with the test management for Jira. And okay, so the screen is now in front of us, and I will select subtasks. I'll use the toggle button here, and we should have this enabled. So if I go back to my subtask, which is part of my story, and the story is part of my sprint, so you can actually manage your testing activity as part of your sprint. And we have this new traceability section that is now in front of us. I'll probably select add an existing one because we have one test case called login with Facebook. So we'll select this and we are ready. So let us start doing the testing. I'll probably go to the issue where we are trying to do a login functionality, and we'll start with that. We'll probably run the test cases. So if you take a look at the develop the login functionality story, I can see my 2 test cases, and to execute this, so there is a term called test execution. You have to basically click on this small play icon, and if you click on it, you will get a pop-up where it says start a new test execution. And at this stage, you can actually assign it to maybe a tester, or maybe if the developer is the same person who is doing this testing, or maybe some quick validations, you can leave it as it is so that it will be the same person. But you have the option to use a different person. Now, since we are trying to develop a mobile app using the same code base, maybe using a framework, but when we build this, we want to test it on Android and iOS. So let us say if I'm doing this testing on maybe Android 9 point something, or maybe Android 10 point something, I can select my my environment here. So this is something that you can do because it is really important to test it on different environments. It is just one way of doing it. When we take a look at the test cycle and test plan, we'll have a slightly better way to organize the test cases, even if you're trying to do it on different environments. But this is like a quick way of doing testing, and we are just linking test cases to stories and running them. That is it. But you have the option to select an environment. So when you select the environment, and when you click on the button, you will be taken to this page where you can now do your execution. So this is something that your tester will do. So you can of course see the details of your test, which is displayed on top. You have the objective, you have different things like maybe you have some attachments, and the thing that I want to show you is the test script. Now before I do that, I just want to go back to my you have this back link on top, and if you click on this, you will be taken to the previous page or the previous screen. In this case, it is the issue, which is always handy because you can move from one page, one screen to another screen, and it will really help you in navigating. So if you take a look at this traceability section, you have no option to take a look at the test case, which is what we want. But if you expand this, you can see the executions. So right now we have one execution for Android, and I may want to just click on this execution directly. and I'll be taken back to the same page where we left, where we were taking a look at the execution. Now this is my execution, but again, before I run this, I want to click on the test cases again, and I want to show you how it looks like when you take a look at the same test case, but if you go to the execution tab. So if you click on the execution tab, you also have the option to take a look at the same execution where we are trying to do it for Android. Now let us not waste any time and let us do this execution. If I click on it, I should be able to take a look at the test script, like enter the username, enter blank username, and you can see here the expected outcome, expected result, and the actual result. So you can either pass or fail. So let us say if we pass both of these test cases, and if I go back to my original screen, or maybe the actual issue. So if I click on back again, maybe I'll use the issue navigator on top. No, not the issue navigator, but the main navigation on top. And if I click on the original story, I should be able to take a look at the status of the execution when I'm looking at my story. So while you're at your story, you can see here that we have two test cases. One of the test cases says it is actually passing. We have the option to take a look at the status of the execution. But for the other one, where we have password validations on sign up, I also want this to be approved. Not really approved, it is already approved, but I also want it to be pass. So let us click on it. Let us start the execution. Maybe this time I want to do it for iOS 13.2. I'll click on start, and it will take me to the execution screen, and we'll quickly do the execution and we'll see how it looks like. We'll probably just pass the first test step, but not the second one. Second one is, let us say, fail. And if you do a fail, or there is also a third one, I'll probably pass this one. So we have one fail and two pass. And if you take a look at the overall status of the overall execution status, it is fail, which is fine. It can happen. You cannot really expect things to work all the time, and this is how it should be, because if your test is failing, you can then take some corrective measures. And if I go back to my traceability section, it will display me the outcome that we have the password validations on sign up, which is actually failing. Now we have one failed execution. We'll probably do maybe one more. Let us say at this stage, and one thing which we didn't do is, let us say if the execution of the test failed, you may want to fix a bug, or you want to raise a bug. So what you can do for this particular execution step, where you entered something and it didn't work as you wanted it to be, you can then probably, I just want to link it to a defect or maybe a bug. So I can use maybe this option here to create issue. So if I click on the create issue, I can raise a bug. And this will of course help me in traceability that we did this execution, but it didn't work and I'm raising a bug. So you can raise a bug, and when you raise a bug, you have the option to of course trace it, and you also have the option to take a look at this bug, which is mentioned under this test step, which is always great. And now what I want to do, I want to fix this bug, and I of course want to do this testing again. So if we open this bug in a separate window, let us see how it looks like, because we have a bug which is linked to our test, execution. But you can notice here that this issue, this bug, it doesn't really have any traceability section, because you're not really testing this bug. You can't really you can fix a bug and then you can do a testing again. And to have this traceability, it will take you back to the original story. So this is really great, because you have different ways of organizing things, and when you link it to a bug, when you raise a bug or a defect, you have the option to trace the original requirement. So now we are back to the original requirement, which is develop the login functionality. I think if the bug is fixed, let us say and by the way, you can see here that it says this particular story is blocked by this bug. So you have to make sure that you fix your bug before you release it, before you make sure that all the test cases are passing, and then only you can mark it as done or mark it as ready for release. So let us say your bug is fixed. I'll change the status of my bug. Right now it is to do, but let us assume it is fixed, or maybe I'll just fix it so that it looks good and it makes sense. So if I'm looking at this bug, let us say I'm a developer and I can see that there is a bug. I need to fix it, so I'll fix it. If I click on the done button on top, and I can go back. I can probably refresh this page, and if you're following this video, or if you're following this video series from the beginning, the whole idea of me creating these videos on test management for Jira is to help you understand how flexible it is and how much you can do. And there are different ways of using it. So in this video, we are just looking at simple method of linking story to a test case, but you can do a lot more. And when you take a look at your test plan and test cycle, these things are still valid of using simple linking. Like for example, when you raise a bug, you can see this you can basically trace it back to the requirement. So these features are still valid even if you're using test cycle or test plan. So let us perform this testing one more time. And if I click on the execution again, I'll probably select iOS 13.2. I'll click on start button. And let us say if you want to go back to the original story, you can go back quickly. But this time I want to just pass it. So I'll click on pass on top. So I don't really want to waste time. So this is another aspect of doing testing quickly. You can manually change the status of the overall execution on top by clicking on pass to save time. And I think it is a good way to give you this option so that you don't have to go through all the steps again. But this time you can see here that we have two tests which are passing. Now what I also want to do here is, let us say you have you have been doing this testing for different environments. So I just want to see whether I can create multiple executions for the same test, but for different environments on the same story. So we did this for 13.2. We may want to do it for 13 point or maybe 12 X or something. So I'll click on the start a new execution. I'm on the execution page. If I go back, I should be able to take a look at my third execution, which is probably for not really a third execution, but yeah, it is a third execution, but for the same test case. So you can see here that for the same test case, you can do execution for every environment, like one for iOS 12.x, the other one for iOS 13.2, and you can have maybe one more for maybe Android. So let us do that. Let us click on Android 10.x. And if I click on start, I should be taken to the execution page, but I can quickly go back. Now, the good thing about this flexibility here is that, as I mentioned earlier, we are developing this mobile app. We have a same code base, like the only code base which we are using for multiple builds. And you can do that, of course, using a framework. These days we have frameworks for different mobile app, like for example, for iOS or Android, you can do native development, but you have the option to use just development using a single code base by using those frameworks. And you want to make sure that you are testing it properly. And this is how you will test it properly, by having the same requirement, develop the login functionality where we have the test case, but we want to perform testing on Android 10.x, iOS 12.x, iOS 13.2, and so on. And you can see here that the overall status, or if you look at this test case, you see a gray color here. It means that you have some tests that you can run, but they are still not run, or they are probably not pass. So you need to make sure that all of them are passing. Only then you can do a release. So this is something that you can do in a simple way. It may seem a bit complex in the beginning, but so far what we did, we just worked on linking a test case to a story or a requirement. And in the future videos, we'll be taking a look at how we can also link your test cases to stories, but with the help of test cycle. And we'll also take a look at the test plan. And in future videos, also we'll be looking at the test script, which we did right now using a step by step, but we'll also be looking at the detailed one, not the detailed, but the plain text and also the BDD. And we'll also take a look at the integration part. So we'll be making more videos on test management for Jira. And if you have any feedback, please let me know. If you want to learn something that you think you need to learn when you're trying to use Jira for testing, and give me feedback. I'll be reading and I'll be looking at your feedback. So I hope you learned something new today and you enjoyed watching this video. Thank you very much.